In 2017, Vanessa Cardenas was living comfortably at her home in Crawfish Rock, Honduras, a village of a few hundred English-speaking Caribbeans on the former British colony island of Roatan. It is here she was approached by an American named Bryman, on behalf of his company, the Institute of Excellence, who was busy greeting locals to announce his new resort project on the island, something the islanders have become accustomed to as the island is far safer than the rest of the country, which sees over 60% of its population below the poverty line and one of the highest murder rates in the world. Keen to keep on good standings with the locals during the construction project, Bryman's company would offer the village small business loans, after-school programs, carpentry workshops, and even offered water from the resort's tanks when Crawfish Rock's water was cut off from their cistern. Initially blindsided by the company's philanthropy, the village was shocked when just 1 month later, they received water bills on their doorstep, payable to none other than the Institute of Excellence. This betrayal would mark the beginning of Vanessa Cardenas' staunch opposition to the project, as she and Crawfish Rock slowly discovered the true nature of what was being built next to their small village. For it was not just a resort being built next door, but an ideological mega project aimed at starting a city from scratch and using funding from Silicon Valley billionaires to create a capitalist utopia where companies can start up with little regulation, trade in Bitcoin, and run medical experiments not possible anywhere else in the world. Known as the city where death is optional, this is the story of Prospera, the billionaire tech city threatening to bankrupt an entire country. Now, before we get into Prospera, we have to start where all great geopolitical adventures start. A US-backed coup of a poor Central American country. On the morning of June 28, 2009, Honduran special forces forcefully removed the Honduran president Manuel Zelaya, waking him from blissful rest in his presidential abode, apparent from the fact that when the freshly couped president appeared in exile on a tarmac in Costa Rica a few hours later, he was still in his pajamas. Mel, as he was popularly known, was a democratic socialist leader, applauded for raising minimum wage and empowering workers to unionize, although often criticized as having authoritarian tendencies. Mel was accused of denying a Supreme Court order to call off a referendum poll for the next election. The referendum, they said, was his attempt to stay in power indefinitely. He would do this by holding a vote during the next election to rewrite the Honduran constitution to allow for multiple presidential terms, a change from the then current rule that only allowed one term. The powers behind the coup failed to take into account that because of the one presidential term rule, Mel would already be out of power by the time the referendum went through. But I digress. The international reaction to the coup was unanimous, with the United Nations, the European Union, and the Organization of American States all condemning the coup. Absent from this list, however, is the United States, where the current president Barry O and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton would publicly state they believe the coup took place, but would never actually formally recognize the coup under US law. The US sent over $200 million to the Honduran military and police between 2009 and 2016. Ironic, because the military, now led by the country's unelected de facto president, Roberto Micheletti, were complicit in massive human rights violations in the months following the coup, including 9 p.m. curfews, stop and search orders with no warrant, the murdering of protesters before the country's official election in November 2009, and a total media blackout for all, except for pro-coup news and innocuous soap operas.
What's up, slime? This is not an ad. There's no ad in this video. Just real quick, I run a book club under my Discord called the Status Quo Book Club. This month we are reading Inventing the Future, Post-Capitalism and a World Without Work. You get access to this book club on my Patreon for a minimum of $3 Canadian a month. On top of that, you get name in the credits, exclusive videos, and exclusive interviews, not available anywhere else. I'm committed to honesty, integrity, and making the best thing I possibly can with the resources I have at the time. So if you want to help with those resources, the best way to do that is go to my Patreon, patreon.com/ourchat. God bless.
Hillary Clinton was walking on geopolitical eggshells as the State Department decried the coup without doing anything to legally recognize it. By legally recognizing the coup, the US would have to cut off all funding to Honduras under US law. The decision to not recognize the coup was allegedly made to ensure Honduras's most impoverished would not be harmed by the cutting off of US funds. On the other hand, according to leaked Hillary Clinton emails in 2009, Clinton helped thwart neighboring countries from potentially trying to restore democracy post-coup. Mel was left-leaning and made friends with other socialist countries in the South who were keen to see him back in power, a fact that has caused many to accuse Hillary Clinton of intentionally funding the coup in order to crush a socialist uprising. I cannot keep fucking digressing. I'm not gonna get into Hillary Clinton conspiracy theories here, but the US's ominous involvement in Honduras is hard to ignore when you consider the man who ended up replacing Mel as Honduras's next president, Porfirio Lobo, affectionately known as Pepe Lobo. This isn't the first time in this story someone has a shitlord nickname. Pepe would be elected November 29th, 2009 with 56% of the popular vote, a successor to de facto president Roberto Micheletti, who ran the country and its media lockdown ever since the June coup, adding to the sentiment from most neighboring states that this election was not legitimate. Regardless, Pepe, a center-right-leaning businessman from a wealthy background, would take power for the next 4 years, reversing many of Mel's socialist reforms including minimum wage, workers' ability to unionize, and the sale of natural resources. But most importantly for our story, he would open Honduras for business. Mid-2011, in conjunction with US economist Paul Romer, Pepe would create special economic zones all across the country. The aim with these zones would be to allow foreign investors to build communities from scratch in Honduras' sparsely inhabited regions in order to drive economic opportunity to the country. These zones would be known as ZEDEs, Zones for Employment and Economic Development. These special regions would be subject only to Honduran criminal code. All regulations, corporate law, tax codes, and basically every other aspect of society would be controlled by investors and developers. Although the first draft of the law would enter the government in 2011, they would not be fully realized until 2013 under the new Honduran president, Juan Orlando Hernandez. We'll call him JOH. Throughout the turmoil over the next decade that would see Pepe have only a 14% approval rating by 2012, Honduras having the highest murder rate on the planet in 2013, and JOH running for 2 consecutive terms after being approved to do so by the Supreme Court, which is the exact thing that caused the 2009 coup, the ZEDE legislation would remain in place and attract foreign investors from all over the world by promising a stable economic safe haven that notably could not be repealed for 50 years under the new law, meaning the special economic zones could survive any regime shift. Honduras is now open for business, and investors are interested. This brings us back to the beginning of our story, with our big dreamer Eric Bryman, the CEO of the Institute of Excellence.
Video Games de Venezuela presenta.
The mid-1980s in Venezuela were characterized by rampant corruption, overspending from the 1970s oil boom, and skyrocketing inflation. It is in the midst of this chaos and economic folly that Eric Bryman was born. Eric was no stranger to mismanagement, government corruption, and failed economic policies. So as a student at Babson College in Boston, he became interested in better ways to run a country. This curiosity would lead him to the idea of charter cities. Charter cities are a plan to subject all aspects of government to the rule of the free market by running the country like a company. The plan works like this. 1. The plan for the city is organized under a for-profit company. 2. The city finds a host nation willing to allow them to build. 3. The city creates infrastructure with venture capital and coerces citizens and businesses to move in with lower taxes and lax business regulations. 4. The city charges its citizens a yearly fee for living in the city. This profit that the city collects is how they pay back investors. Basically, it's an app tech startup that it just happens to be a city. Under this free market logic, the city is incorruptible, whereas a regular government can actively harm its citizens and receive little risk of losing power. See every dictatorship in history. A charter city has to create the best possible conditions for its citizens and businesses. If they don't, people stop paying, they leave, the company loses money, they can't pay back shareholders, and the whole thing goes under. If they do well, by creating a great environment, more people move in, more people pay their fee, more investors invest in the company, and everyone's happy. The invisible hand of the free market will guide us to prosperity, and it'll be so good that it's impossible to ignore. Sounds nice, right? Well, Eric felt the same way, and after some investment banking ventures throughout Latin America, he felt it was time to make this idea a reality. Eric would purchase 58 acres on the island of Roatan in 2017, capitalizing on the ZEDEs Honduras had created 4 years prior, and began breaking ground to build the city's first infrastructure next to the small village of Crawfish Rock. During this time, Eric was busy drafting the city's constitution, 3,500-page legal code, minimum wage, and a framework for political representation, all of which could be drafted from scratch. It wouldn't be until 2021 that Eric's new city, now known as Prospera, would start moving in new residents. Initially, citizens can purchase e-residency for $1,300 a year. This gives them the ability to register businesses, claim income, and potentially live in the city. Prospera is particularly attractive to businesses due to its unique handling of regulations. Rather than having a single regulatory body that all industries must follow, businesses are able to choose from a menu of regulations from 38 member states of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Basically, Latvia happens to have efficient construction regulations? Pick theirs to build your new office for your biomed lab. Ooh, but Latvia has really bureaucratic biomed regulations? Well, fuck them. Go with Chile's biomed regulations. If you feel they're more efficient, you get to choose, and again, regulations are subject to the invisible hand of the free market. The good ones get picked, the bad ones don't. As of 2024, over 200 businesses have made their way to Prospera due to these regulations, including new construction projects like Duna Residences, which is now the tallest building on the island of Roatan, or Minicircle, a gene therapy clinic that opened its doors in Prospera, doing experimental gene therapy not possible anywhere else. I would also like to note that the first name of the CEO of Minicircle is fucking Machiavelli. Start your day on the sunny beaches of Roatan, do some co-working at a Bitcoin cafe, register your new business same day all from the comfort of your phone, get your Tesla key fob implanted in your thumb, attend a conference of the world's best minds on the future of governance, and retire for the evening at a cocktail party, bumping shoulders with the movers and shakers of the tech world. Nothing will go wrong, and everyone is happy. But have you ever stopped to wonder what Honduras thinks of all of this? If a poor Central American nation rife with political turmoil is excited about the fact that there are billions of dollars flooding into a city-state within its borders, rivaling the wealth and power of the government itself. Well, Eric Bryman and Prospera saw this coming, and that's why they're suing Honduras for $10 billion. This brings us back to Vanessa Cardenas and her small village of Crawfish Rock. Crawfish Rock has long been skeptical of the resort-turned-libertarian paradise being built next to the village, especially since the water bill fiasco. But what worries them more is what Prospera could become. Images surfaced of future development plans for the city that seem to expropriate the community of Crawfish Rock, something that CEO Eric Bryman has denied. On top of this, the area has come under heavy surveillance as security cameras and guards begin to appear all over the area to protect the rapidly growing city-state. To combat this, Vanessa is now the leader of the Community Council of Crawfish Rock, an organization fighting against the potential expropriation of the village. Farther complicating the relationship between Prospera and Crawfish Rock is the fact the city employs locals from the village who see the city as a new employment opportunity in one of the poorest parts of the country. This came to a head when supporters of Prospera barged into a meeting being held by the council to discuss the future of Crawfish Rock, resulting in a brawl that left many attendees injured and Vanessa with a bloody nose. But the opposition doesn't stop there. In 2022, JOH, the leader responsible for the creation of the Zedes, was voted out of power. Winning in a landslide victory is Xiomara Castro, a staunch socialist whose key policy issue was shutting down the Zedes once and for all, as she claimed they threatened the sovereignty of Honduras. The issue is that the Zedes were written as a constitutional amendment, meaning that Castro would have to amend the amendment in order to halt the creation of new Zedes and shut down the current ones, which are still constitutionally protected for 50 years under the law. After fighting for this since her campaign in 2022, Honduras top court declared the Zedes unconstitutional on September 20th, 2024, a move that Prospera sees as completely illegal, not only going against their 50-year agreement under the Zedes law, but also violating a niche trade agreement signed between the US and Honduras. ISDSs, or investor state dispute settlements, are written into most international trade agreements. This niche law protects foreign investors from asset seizure and corrupt court judges in host nations. The thing is that these suits don't work the other way. Prospera sees Castro's view on the Zedes as an infringement on their rights as a foreign investor. So to combat this, they are suing Honduras for over $10 billion, over 1/3 of the country's entire GDP. A suit they are likely to win as the majority of ISDS disputes are settled in the investor's favor. Honduras is exhausting all of its legal resources, and the threat of the military showing up on Prospera's white marble doorstep becomes ever more likely. Whether this will trigger a wider geopolitical conflict or simply fade into obscurity is unknown. As it stands, it's business as usual for the startup city. They are well on their way to reaching their goal of 10,000 permanent residents by 2030, building more infrastructure and continuing to receive capital from the world's richest tech investors. What price are you willing to pay for progress? What's brewing between Castro's Honduras, Cardenas Crawfish Rock, and Bryman's startup city Prospera isn't just a niche economic conflict. As techno-capital rivals the power of governments, who are we to stop it? Who is anyone to say they know better than the free market? That Honduras should remain unchanged even if it means stifling groundbreaking research and new ways of governments that could potentially change the way we organize societies. What if everything goes well? What if Castro is against Prospera not as a threat to the sovereignty of Honduras, but selfishly as a threat to her power? What if Prospera becomes responsible for groundbreaking research and medical breakthroughs not possible anywhere else? Furthermore, what if Prospera brings wealth and investments to a nation that wouldn't have seen it otherwise? It happened in Panama with the Panama Canal just to the south. Why couldn't it happen again? On the contrary, what if Prospera is a predatory state aimed at exploiting cheap labor in a struggling nation and expropriating more and more land for their nefarious needs, evading taxes and hoarding billions of dollars while the residents of Honduras continue to suffer under poverty and gang warfare? What I'm getting at is this is the beginning of something big, something unseen at any other point in history. The creation of techno city-states fully subject to the free market, competing not only with their host nations, but with each other as more and more pop up. The creation of these new economic zones is happening all over China, El Salvador, and has happened already in Dubai. No longer do we need to inherit centuries-old policies and laws that cannot compete with the exponential growth of tech. We can create something brand new. Prospera sets off a lot of alarms for me, and it has for everyone I've explained it to. But there's something exciting about rethinking the way we organize society. The question is, what are you willing to compromise for progress? Also, if anyone from Prospera sees this, I'd be happy to come down and visit in person. The original goal of this video was to get on the ground in Honduras, so I'd be happy to do a part 2. Go outside, buy the dip, do something with AI, and never kill yourself.